Hello everyone and welcome to week 10 of Exercise Physiology for Sport with Concordia University. Once again, I'm Professor Mark Baines. We are in the second to last week of the course. And this week we're going to talk about last couple chapters, of course, we talked about regarding training as well as youth, older athletes and female athletes and nutrition, a little more depth. Starting first and foremost with concepts from last week, week 9. First of all, test frequency and selection. Generally recommended to be testing at least every 8 to 12 weeks. Could be more often, as much as every month, all depending upon your athletes and what information you're gathering from that training. The more you need more motivation for your athletes, the more you need to have a clear idea of how your athletes are responding, the more often you should test. If there's any concern at all regarding your athletes either not being happy with their results or being frustrated that they're not making enough advancement, you don't want to test as often. So you got to kind of know your athletes too. It's not just a matter of scientifically how often it should occur. Generally speaking, remember the primary reason we test every 8 to 12 weeks, or really even 4 to 8 weeks, is around that time frame is when we have significant endocrine system changes as well as nervous system changes. They tend to move better, or should, assuming we're doing all the right work with proper rest ratios and proper intensity and proper frequency, all those things, the fitter principles, right? Assuming we're doing those things with the right tools and the right equipment and the right challenge for the exercises, then we should be seeing some adaptation with the hormonal response and well as the nervous system response as well. Right muscle fibers firing at the right time, in the right sequence, all that kind of thing. Not wearing our bodies down, moving really, really well, and of course not getting overly stressed out because we're actually adapting well to everything around us. That's what we're looking for. It isn't always about strength and hypertrophy changes or specific speed as it relates to muscle size changes as much as those nervous system and endocrine system changes. So that said, agility tests, we talked mostly about like the T-test and the 5-10-5, but there are far more tests to be using, the box test and some other tests to be using. If you have any athletes that are changing direction a lot in the sport, you should be doing one of those tests at least at the beginning of your season, maybe middle of the season, and the end of the season, or during the off season more often, or preseason, however often as you possibly can, so you can see how athletes are improving. It also serves as, again, all these tests serve as athletic performance goal setting for a lot of our athletes. They go, oh, I got to beat that time. Exactly. These are competitive people. So doing tests more often is the people that should be shooting the test the most are the athletes. It's the average fitness people that can't stand them because they're not really looking for performance goal, whereas all these athletes are. It's a huge thing to be doing. Anaerobic power and speed, again, we're talking about that 10 seconds and less. So a very, very short test. 40-yard dash is a real simple one. There are other tests that we talk about testing anaerobic power, average power, and they'll go for anywhere between 20, 30 meters or more with a little brief break, and then they go again. That's fine, but that's average power. Now, those tests are fine for gauging how someone might perform over the course of a game or a contest, but they're not going to give you maximal speed and power. So be clear about what you're testing when you do those tests. Anaerobic threshold, the only way we're going to get a real accurate test is you're taking blood every 30 seconds-ish or so intervals during testing, or even more often, all depending on the specific test you're using. There are TED treadmill tests that are measuring gas exchange while taking blood. There's also using on a track while just taking blood. Otherwise, we're kind of estimating to some extent. As we mentioned before, the talk test can give you some idea about someone's anaerobic threshold. It's only significant when you have athletes who are engaging in significant performance with very little stop, if at all, for 10, 12, 15 plus minutes. If that's occurring, you want to be a little more aware of what someone's anaerobic threshold capacity, capability is. VO2 max aerobic capacity, any athletes you have should be doing those, either like an incremental like Bruce treadmill test. If you have a runner, you're dealing with straight people who are running on the ground, you need to be doing a Cooper test, because that's going to give you the best indicator of actual performance-wise VO2 max. Not just some, as much as treadmill tests give you a lot of indication about, generally speaking, someone's VO2 max, we're not typically running on a treadmill out there. It's a different surface. There's tremendous friction forces against us as far as external forces against you the faster you go on a treadmill, which makes it not quite the same as running outside. The good old Cooper test is one of the best. It's how far can you get in 12 minutes? And that's a great one to be considering using for people who are engaging, or athletes are engaging in sports, again, that are going for those 10, 12, 15 plus minutes. Yep, soccer, yep, basketball, any sports where you're engaging in activity that's fairly significant for long periods. They may have short little brief breaks, but still significant for those tests, okay? That said, heart rate at anaerobic threshold. Your heart rate anaerobic threshold is going to be somewhere in that as low as 50% for some athletes. For some detrained individuals, someone has been injured, hasn't done anything for a year or two, or 6 months or more. Probably not that short of a period of time for someone who's already an athlete. They take 6 months off. Probably not see an unbelievable downturn, but you could see as much as 50% or more in someone's change in their response. It's a little high for an athlete, but someone's never worked out before, exercised before, yeah, you might see a dramatic downturn. From as little as 40-50% VO2 max, which is like 60-70% somewhere in there with their max heart rate, is they're already going to be their anaerobic threshold, okay? That lactate threshold followed by then the anaerobic threshold. And then, of course, someone who's more athletic, an athlete could be as high as that 70-80% VO2 max. That's unusual. That is a really highly trained endurance type athlete or athlete engaging in any sport where their endurance is a factor and they're highly capable. Otherwise, you're not going to see that such a high response. But again, the talk test is a really good one from a general standpoint. Your athletes can't talk in a complete sentence without taking a break, or they're breathing and they can't even talk at all. They're well past the anaerobic threshold. And you got to ask yourself if you're really getting much out of the particular activity or drill you're engaging in right now. Not talking about competition. You do what you can when you're in the middle of it, right? Now, some really good numbers for you. Now, we've talked about this quite a bit over many, many chapters over the course of this course. You got some good numbers I really hope you take with you. There's one little brief type on there. I'll get there in a second. 40-50% VO2 max. That's equating, it's similar to about 65-70% max heart rate. That's a recovery day, a light day, detraining day. That's for someone who has got significant stress, they're really worn down, they're beat up, they are not feeling well, not sick, just not feeling great, right? And they're sore, they're stiff, all that kind of stuff, okay? Or immediately following a really intense workout, even if they're not sore and stiff. You know that central nervous system-wise, they're worn down. They might have some little peripheral fatigue. They probably have a significant CNS fatigue they're not even aware of. They just can't produce the same amount of force. You want to have that light level activity for like cardiovascular type focus type activity, okay? And then, of course, that 50-70% VO2 max, which equates to about 70-80% max heart rate. And again, you can look at the VO2 max to heart rate calculator online, like it's Chabot College, actually Chabot College. I don't even know how you pronounce it exactly. I know of it, never actually talked to anyone from the college, so hopefully I'm doing it justice by actually how I say the name for the school. But that said, that's a good area whereby we start to see some VO2 max improvement. You got to be at least 50% VO2 max, which is roughly about 70% of someone's max heart rate. Now, these are not perfect because, again, so many variables of your current stress. You're not feeling well, you're not getting enough sleep, you're not eating well, can throw all these things off. But they're pretty accurate if all things are fairly balanced, right? That's the tough thing, though, isn't it? About 70-85% VO2 max. Now we're talking about typical anaerobic work. For anaerobic interval type work beginning. I didn't say high intensity intervals, just said anaerobic type interval work. Or someone's going to steady state run kind of thing, which is going to be kind of borderline for an anaerobic threshold kind of point, right? 80% max heart rate to up to about, honestly, about 90% max heart rate, okay? That's where the typo was. It didn't actually show you a range in that third point right there for typical of anaerobic work. And then finally, for the high level intensity type work, for high intensity interval type work, that 20-30 second time frame, whatnot, now we're talking about 85 to 100%. We said plus VO2 max because some people think of high intensity intervals as being like 10-15 seconds. It's awfully short for high intensity intervals. But that said, it would be faster than VO2 max because certainly your VO2 max pace is what you can run. As we says, must know your VO2 max pace. How fast can you run? What is your pace at about 10 to 12 minute strong, as fast as you can possibly go run? So if they're running a 6-minute mile, well, they're going to probably run faster than that pace for a typical 20-30 second run for high intensity intervals, let alone a 60-second run with a 60-90 second break, right? And that's what we want to look at, that 60 to 90 second break, probably at little 30-second rest. That's a lot to expect for somebody who's trying to go at 90, 95, 100% effort relative to VO2 max. That's the parts a lot of people have a hard time, I think, recognizing the difference between VO2 max and all-out effort. A sprint is going to be faster than VO2 max because VO2 max is, again, your pace for 10 to 12 minutes. Well past that as far as actual pacing, right? We're talking about 180, 200%, so to speak, or faster, all depending on the athlete and what's going on. Which brings us to that particular concept. That's for cardiovascular work we're talking about. And honestly, high-intensity interval training, I'm going to say this again, I've said it several times, hopefully you're getting it, I kind of think you are, that your high-intensity intervals, save it for running. If you got runners or people who are playing sports on ground, not a cyclist, then do it on the cycle. If you're a swimmer, then they do it in the pool. But don't do it in the weight room. Stay with that for strength work, your hypertrophy work, your power and speed type work, which we're talking about now. Heart rate, you're still going to measure because you still want to know how they're responding to stress. You still write that down because maybe the heart rate is 150 or 130 or 170. You write it down because you want to know over time, hopefully, doing the same level training intensity, same level effort, same speed, same performance. Hopefully the heart rate is dropping. You're getting somewhere. They may not be getting faster or stronger or more size that you can tell necessarily, but if the heart rate is dropping at that same level of effort, the same performance, they're going to get the adaptation. It is coming. You're just not seeing the results of it yet. Because remember, again, what we do now, we're not going to see for 4 to 8 weeks or more the benefits from it, which is also why people talk a little about tapering and coming down toward level of competition. You don't want to go all out high intensity other than to prove to your athlete they can do it. You don't want to beat them up in the 4 weeks before, definitely not 4 weeks before, 2 weeks before their biggest competition of the year, the end of their season. You want to be training, trying to maintain what you've got. You're kind of going up to that 8-week point prior to your primary and major competition. You're trying to get as much conditioning as you can at that point. Then at that point, you're going with what you got. That's why the rest of the year is so important, the previous 44 weeks or so, right? That's why it's so vital, because you're not seeing a lot of benefit from it. That's why you see a lot of teams at the very end of the season will start to do really, really well, but it's too late. Because maybe they're peaking during the season, but they didn't peak in the beginning of the season well enough to maintain what they had throughout the season. Or maybe they peaked too early during the beginning of their season, and they can't maintain it for 12 weeks, 16 weeks. There's all that stuff you have to take into account, right? It's very difficult. There's nothing easy about it. But the more we know about the science, the better job we can do with our athletes. And that work period, about 40 to 75 seconds. It's a pretty strong work period for expectation for hypertrophy. You can't go at least 40 seconds. You're going to get some hypertrophy. You're not going to maximize it. It'll be a lot more towards maximal strength. So you want to really go about 40 seconds to 75 seconds, where the goal is to improve size or growth of muscle fibers when we're talking about strength training, okay? 60, 90 seconds rest, that's about as research is to death for that rest period, for time frame, for getting that roughly 70%-ish or so ATP back, maybe a little bit more, 70, 80% ATP, to be able to perform that work at 60, 85% max force output for hypertrophy. And then 1 to 40 seconds, we're talking about strength in this case here, because maximal strength, really 1 rep, but probably more like 5 seconds. Technically 1 second, but really 5 seconds or so, because when you're lifting maximal loads, you're not moving fast. It's low velocity, high force output. That's just all there is to it. You're lifting high loads, it's going to be low velocity and high force output, because you have to, otherwise you can't move the load, right? Up to about 40 seconds of work with rest periods 3 to 5 minutes. You don't rest that long, highly doubtful the next set's going to be as good as the first set was. Unless you're, as we like to say, dogging it or pulling back, holding back something, because you're not going to get it. If you're not trying to rest for 2 minutes, some of you said some of your posts like 2 minutes or less, 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Good luck. If your athletes are going to try to do 3 to 5 or 6 sets, which is typical for maximal strength and or hypertrophy somewhere in there, good luck in performing the same level repeatedly if you're going to rest for only 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And hey, if your athletes can do it and you're happy with the results, they're happy with the results, and they're improving, then don't worry about it. Okay, but that's the key factor. Their movement, their skill has to be improving. They have to look more fluid. Someone has to say, that's a nice looking bench press. That's a beautiful squat. Looks fantastic. Not just watching how low the hips go. Not just watching whether the load came up and down, but watching the joint action, watching the direction of forces. We're getting to biomechanics now, but that plays a role. There's crossover here, right? It's not just physiology. Not just about work and rest and whatnot. What else is happening during that exercise? And of course, the output, force output wise for maximal strength is 80 to 100%. And for maximal power, that ultra short periods of work, 1 to 10 seconds, power. Again, none of these work periods really worry about exactly what the heart rate is, other than we do measure it so we know if the person is improving or getting worse. If the heart rate was doing sprints, and the heart rate typically gets about 140-ish, 145-ish. Today, their first sprint, they're at 155. I can tell you right now, the sprinting is going to be low performance. You can see it before you see it. That's why we take the heart rate. We know what's happening, don't waste our time. I know it's hard for a lot of you to see why measuring heart rate matters that much when you're not thinking about like a cardiovascular trained athlete. Oh, it matters tremendously. Take the heart rate. Ask the question. You ran a sprint. What's your RP? Scale 1 to 10. How'd you feel? Was it a level 10? It's a whole lot sprint. Probably should feel something like a 9 or 10 level effort. Feels like a 4. Well, they're not working very hard, right? Unless you're Usain Bolt. You said it felt like a 4 and you ran a 9.58. Hey, we'll let you go. There's always those levels of athletes, once in a while you get them, that are so spectacular, kind of throw a lot of things out the window because they're just kind of unique. But we're talking about world class here. We're not talking about most athletes we're ever going to see in our own coaching experience. I hope you get the opportunity. I certainly never have. I've coached some Olympians, but even they are not that level, but unless they are the world champion. It's a whole different level, right? Rest period is going to need to be 3 to 5 minutes because you're looking for 90 to 100% 95, 100% ATP replenishment, right? And that's why it's 95, 100% maximal force output. You can only handle it for 1 to 10 seconds, ATP, CP. There you go. There's your work periods, rest periods, intensity, VO2 max, heart rate. And I keep bugging you all about that. Your last couple weeks of posts better reflect those numbers because there they are. Now, you might even say, it all depends if they're arrested, if they're not feeling well. These things may vary a little bit. But if they're higher than these numbers, from a standpoint of view, they need more rest, or their level of RPE is higher than what we're talking about here, then you're going to see a decline in performance. So it's one thing to say they're not getting to those numbers and we're still seeing performance. Hey, great. But if they're going higher than those numbers, you're going to fatigue them. You've got to be very, very careful on what your goal is and being clear about the expectation of work, rest, intensity, VO2 max, heart rate, RPE, all the above when you train. Okay? And then lastly, the key factor for high intensity interval training work, honestly, have yet to see it, and I've had some state champions in high school track for milers and half milers and milers and 2 milers, and I've had some that have gone on to be second or third in the nation for high school, and in collegiate training, seeing the same for conference champions and whatnot. That if you're going to expect high intensity interval work, you're not going to see more than about 8 intervals unless we're talking about a world-class athlete. There's always those people you hear about, super stories that are just amazing. We all want to be that athlete that can do 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 80, 100 sets of things. But this is not a normal thing. 4 to 8 sets. If you can do 8 sets of near your absolute max, whereby you've seen it performance, you can repeat it that many times, you're going to see some dramatic improvement over the next few weeks from that athlete. I'm going to highly recommend you rethink how many high intensity intervals you ask your athletes to perform, and making sure you're looking at not just whether they're getting the work done. You're going for the work period. Good job. Eating your rest well. Good. Great. Heart rate's got to come down. Force output's got to be high. They got to be fast enough to make that time, which is why we say for speed, not for lifting weights here. And of course, mechanics of how they move. Okay, and then this week we have female athletes, female athlete triad. You have issues with amenorrhea, hormonal response, where we wear female athletes down. We've got to be really cautious about negative effects from not eating well, eating disorders, and of course bone density issues. Right, all those things play a huge, tremendous role for women, and whereby we have to make sure we're getting loading. We're going to biomechanics again here. Loading through the bone, which is like a squatting, deadlifting, overhead pressing, running, jumping. All these things play a great role, but we have to make sure that knee lines up with that ankle, and that hip, knee, and ankle line up properly. They move well. They're fluid. If they don't move well fluidly, we slow them down. Right? Amenorrhea or issues with eating disorders can affect that too. Hormonal problems. You may have to bring in a dietitian. If you're a female coach, female athletes, it makes this much easier because at least you can have more discussions with them. A little tougher with the men with the female athletes because they don't think you get them, right? Seen it many times before, and I get it because it's hard to get it, right? And you want to have that talk with them, or have someone that's better off, a dietitian who can actually talk with them, and if need be, if someone has major issues, even a psychologist or a psychiatrist talking about eating issues, or a therapist at least, if they're having particular issues, because long-term that could really plague them in their lives, not just their performance as an athlete. That Q angle, we're talking about the hip to knee angle. One of the reasons why a lot of women have so many knee issues is because of that angle. And it relates to also a lot of ankle issues too, let alone hamstring issues, things like all these things. But really knee in particular draws a lot of attention with issues with tearing meniscus, with ACL, MCL, LCL, PCL, anything ligamentous damage and injury, because of that Q angle. You see those knees go in, especially like the basketball players, the volleyball players in particular, because there's so much up and down, up and down, up and down, change direction, up and down, up and down, and up and down. There's a huge stress upon them. You really got to have a strong strength program in the off season. Cannot stress that enough. Running program / agility. And I say running program, getting used to the sport, right? The speed, and be able to handle those loads, and watching their knee tracking. If you see, because it's going to happen. You're going to have a funky angle, they're going to come down, the knee's going to turn in a funky angle. If they're strong enough, they'll survive it, right? You slow down a football game or a basketball game or a volleyball game, any of those kinds of sports, lacrosse, soccer, all of them, right? They're going to see all sorts of crazy angles from the knee relative to the foot and the hip. And if they're strong and stable, it'll happen. They'll kind of go, that didn't feel very good. They're back running again, as opposed to actually tearing something and hurting them. So we really have to have a strong program in the off-season and the preseason with strength training, lower velocity, higher loads, building into higher loads, and then right away, right? Just movement skill first. Then we start getting into the lower velocity with high loads before we ever start talking about being explosive to avoid those issues coming up, okay? And if you start seeing those problems, number one rule, slow them down. Then reduce the range of motion, and of course, reduce the load, okay? Young athletes. The greatest concern with our younger athletes is epiphyseal plate or growth plate damage that's only going to occur, it's more likely to occur from a kid falling out of a tree or a kid getting hit by a car, something tremendous, okay? It doesn't usually come from lifting weights. It's really been an unfortunate thing. I'm not a big fan, personally, of giving a 10-year-old or 12-year-old to dumbbells, but it's not because they can't lift dumbbells, because most of them lack the mechanics to move properly. They don't have the coordination. They've not played enough sports. They've not done anything activity-wise to justify the readiness for grabbing a load that's significant, starting to push it over their head or pushing it in front of them, whatnot. And be careful, though, with saying things like, well, body weight first. I said this in a previous weekly video, but technically a dumbbell chest press is a lot less load than a push-up for a majority of people. Okay, I don't know what lift weights you're lifting when you're pressing off your chest. You get two 15, 20-pound dumbbells and you weigh 150 pounds. Push-up's harder on your shoulder and your wrist and your elbow and your hands than is the two dumbbells you're putting in your hands. So be careful saying things like body weight first. Just don't agree with that at all. Not true. Just not true. So relative to the lifting, the motion itself, find the least amount of stress, build upward from there. Don't get into body weight first and all that kind of stuff. It's just not true, okay? But that said, if they can move well, they can handle the load. If they can be fluid, they can handle the load or move potentially more load. If they can't, don't do it. It's just that simple, okay? We gotta be really conscious of work durations, volume of work, let alone the mechanics, how kids move, to avoid issues with epiphyseal plate type problems, okay? And that said, diabetic athletes, athletes who are diabetic, most of it, they're type 1 insulin dependent. They know when they're bonking. They know when they have problems. They got to take the insulin shot. They're very intuitive at the standpoint. They can feel it. They know what's happening. You don't have to do a whole lot of regulation with those athletes. You want to make sure they're telling you and not trying to suck it up and deal with it. Occasionally that can happen. Got to make sure you're communicating more, because anybody who has a special need, we have to talk to them more. It's tough as a coach. You're like, I don't want to give them too much independent focus. Well, that's kind of our job. I get it, but that is our job. Carbohydrate, of course, is a big issue for a lot of people. They say that carbohydrate's the problem. No, it's not. Type 1 insulin dependent, obviously they need insulin, but it's not, carb is not the issue. It's their issue is being able to break down that carbohydrate and use it for energy, so they take in the insulin, right? That said, more conditioned they are, I've seen this numerous times, it's pretty incredible stuff. When an athlete gets more conditioned, or you become more athletic, get more conditioned, cardiovascular-wise, right, you find they have less need to take insulin in for the type 1 dependent athletes. And the athletes, not really typically athletes, but individuals or juveniles or young kids who have type 2 diabetes, they don't have it as they're born. It actually comes later in life from their poor eating habits. And really, it's not even poor eating habits. It's a lack of exercise. You don't have kids who eat badly, who exercise up the yin-yang, or working out, playing 2, 3, 4+ hours per day. They're not diabetics. They're just not. You don't have it. Exercise is the greater issue here than diet. Diet is huge. We all know that. Please don't ever think we're talking about diet not being important. But the lack of exercise is a greater problem for the general population. It's not a problem for our athletes. The greater problem for athletes is making sure they get enough of what they need. And they shouldn't fear carbohydrates. That's not the problem. Be careful sending someone to a medical doctor regarding diabetic issues with diet. No. Registered dietitian. Okay, someone who's a registered dietitian or a clinical nutritionist, meaning they have a degree in this area. Okay, not someone who just calls himself a nutritionist. Be careful who you get advice from as well. But it's not all carbs are not sugar. Sugar is, a monosaccharide, something that breaks down very, very fast. Best time for it, for the hour plus of activity, every 15, 20 minutes, 6 to 8 ounces of a carbohydrate, Gatorade type solution for the hour plus activities every 15, 20 minutes. If they're not engaging in hour plus activity, under an hour, they drink water every 10, 15 minutes, 6 to 8 ounces-ish. Definitely not less than 6 ounces. I know the book says 5 ounces, but that's fine. 5 ounces, fine. But certainly up 10 ounces as much as or more for some athletes. But that said, post-workout, anywhere between 15 to 90 minutes. Different sources say got to do it within a half an hour. Like, be careful with that. You can actually inhibit growth hormone if you take carbohydrate in too soon following the workout. If someone's goal is to maximize power, strength, or hypertrophy, you don't want to take the carb in too fast post-workout. Okay, so you want to have sugars, the best time for it, during long duration activity, and at the end post-activity to replenish back the nutrients needed to support the system, and then you get a good meal in an hour or two after that with complex carbohydrates. We're really talking about longer term. And wheats and grains, gluten is not going to hurt much of anybody unless they have a gluten intolerance. Please don't let your athletes read books on diet and follow those things. Please don't let them do it. Okay, you better read what they read, by the way, so you can actually talk to this kind of thing for basics, but send them to a dietitian when they start exhibiting strange behaviors and how they eat and fearing carbohydrates. as if it's a problem for them. It's just not. The more cardiovascular exercise they need, the more carbohydrates they're going to need. Any athlete takes in more carb than any other athlete, pound for pound. It's the cardiovascularly trained athlete. Just that simple. And no well-conditioned cardiovascular trained athletes has issues with blood sugar problems. They just don't. Something to keep in mind. Okay? Like all things, we could talk about it for 5 days and we still wouldn't have enough time spent on that. Things to think about, though. Older athletes, sarcopenia, loss of muscle fiber. They can actually lose up to 50% or more muscle fiber loss by inactivity as they get older. But here's the thing. That said, 50% of it can easily be gained back with regular, not easily, but certainly can be gained back with regular activity, regular strength training, regular hypertrophy training. So that's something to really think about when they get to be 50 plus years old. Over 10 years, they can lose that 10% easily. Muscle fiber and 50% loss of strength. They can lose a tremendous amount, but they can bring it back. Okay, 50% of it can come back because you lost 50%. You can gain back everything quite quickly over the course of a few months. That's what we say quickly, assuming they're engaging in it regularly from what you may have lost. It may take years, okay, but you certainly don't want to be putting it off. Older adults, referring to typically people who are 65 years of age or older, okay? Not necessarily 50. 50, some people start calling it 50, but really it's 65 or older, okay? That said, carbs daily and during after exercise, your daily intake, we're talking about 55%, 45% on the low side, more like 50, 55% or more of your diet should be taken in for carbohydrate. That's really the Institute of Medicine, National Institute of Health, and American College of Sports Medicine come with those numbers. 45 to 65% of your diet from carbohydrate. And the biggest predominant time to eat carbohydrates, the most important time to take carbohydrates, really, before, possibly during, and after exercise, where you have the greatest stress during your day. Now, honestly, someone's taking a high-level test mentally. Guess what you need? Significant carbohydrate hour or two before your activity. Maybe not during the activity necessarily, once again. Unless you're in a long test and maybe you have a bar with you. It's probably not a bad idea if you have such options, really. You may not. And then, of course, post-workout, post-stress, having more carbohydrate then, the most important times. Please ignore, flat out ignore. Shouldn't eat carbohydrates after a certain time at night. Depends on what's going on in your night. If you're working out at night, you got to eat at night, carbohydrate-wise, right? Depends a lot of factors on your lifestyle. Protein. You cannot really utilize and break down and make part of you from a standpoint of using for cell formation, as well as enzyme formation, hormone formation, except for the sex hormones. That's fat's job. Testosterone, estrogen is fat's job. All the other hormones and the creation of them, that's protein. 20-25 grams per sitting. Any more than that, probably going to have gastrointestinal issues, meaning just going to the bathroom more often, stomach issues maybe, digestive problems. I mean, let's be clear, farting, things like that, all that kind of stuff. That stuff may happen more regularly if you're taking in too much protein at one sitting. That should be long over the course of the day, and really should be 0.8 to 1.8 grams per kilogram body weight, generally speaking. Any more than that, it's not scientifically supported. It's not wrong, but it's also not scientifically supported. There's all that kind of stuff, right? Fat. Primary job is hormone function. Hormones can't function well if you don't get the right fats. Now we're talking about, getting the good fats, the monounsaturated fats that have polyunsaturated fats in them, the PUFAs, right? Your omega-3s you hear the most about because they're the ones that are harder to get. Omega-6 and 9s are typically in good fats. Certainly want to have more of the fish if at all possible. Salmon, black cod, mackerel, sardines. Some of those are not my favorite fish either, but those are the best sources for those omega-3s and the polyunsaturated fats. Of course, all fats have natural occurring fats have more monounsaturated fat than polyunsaturated fat, but some of them have a higher concentration of polyunsaturated fats per content of the food you're eating. Fish is the number one thing, okay? You're not going to get that much from your nuts and seeds comparatively to fish, not even close. But yes, nuts and seeds are good choices too. Avocado, going to get plenty of monounsaturated fat, not much polyunsaturated fat. So you got to really rethink. Some people talk about certain foods being a big factor. They're all good choices, have a wide variety, as any dietitian would say. And of course, that said, if someone's having issues with hormones, hormone balance, hormone problems, fluctuations, let's be clear, we're talking about females this week. That's a big one for females. Guess what they really need to make sure they're not getting too light of is fat. I had issues with overtraining when I wasn't getting enough fat, right, as a male. So fat plays a huge role in hormone function, especially testosterone, which is a big one for our power athletes, strength and hypertrophy. Get those fats, right? And of course, the ones we want to try to avoid, less saturated fat from the meats, not eating beef all the dang time. For most college kids, not a problem. They can't afford it, right? And then that said, the trans fats are the big ones, when you're eating out. That's why we tell people not to eat out as much as possible, okay? Making your own food. Water intake, we talked about this before. Every 2 hours, drinking water. or drink enough water where you're peeing every 2 hours rather. And during and after exercise, want to make sure you're drinking, like we said, 6 to 8 ounces. Your book says 5 to 10 ounces every 10, 15 minutes. Definitely not more than every 20 minutes. Not less often than every 20 minutes, but at the least. Okay, during activity, during any significant activity. If you're sitting on the sideline, sitting on the bench, doesn't really matter a whole lot. Okay, that said, to active people. And of course, after exercise, whatever you lost 1 or 2 pounds of weight. Well, you got to drink 1.5 to double that over the course of the next 3 hours or so post-workout. Okay. That said, moving on, a lot of stuff there in that particular video. I'm really hoping you watched this and took it all the way through. Some good stuff going forward for you with coaching, things to think about. All right, a lot of things to think about. Posts have been solid as a whole. Doing very, very well this whole entire course. Got 2 more this week and next week. Got to finish strong, okay? Want to get as much as we can out of these posts and a good discussion and reading whatever else is writing so you get some good things to think about for you, your coaching going forward. Hopefully you're taking the sample posts as well, copying and pasting them, taking them with you so you can use that data too, or just remembering it works for me, okay? Extra credit, if you need more credit, there are opportunities for that, but you're going to have to contact me to find out what that might be. It's going to be a lot of work, but if you want an A and you're getting a B, if you think you're not going to get your B, you want to get more than that, you got to get that done. But the biggest thing being, get those Learn Smarts done, get those discussion board posts in with high quality, and of course you got your big test next week worth 2.5 times 1,000 points versus the other 2 tests were 400 points each. So technically they're worth 1.5 more than both other 2 tests put together, okay, or 1 1/3, okay. That said, call or email if you have questions, always. And you know what? Even beyond the course, something ever comes up when you're coaching in the days, months, and years beyond, my guess is you won't contact me. And that is totally fine. But I'm always open to that, always looking to help you any way that I can. That is my job. That's what I feel like I'm here to do. Okay? Hope all is going well for you. Let me know how I can help you. We'll see you again soon.